Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is July 29th, a Monday around here, and we're going to start off talking a little bit about the House settlement. There were some new updates there. We want to get you updated on the roster cap that is going to be put in place. It sounds like it's going to be 105 for all the college football programs out there. Then we'll get into the new NIL ruling, which is much more important and much more impactful and definitely will cause a little bit more problems. Then we're going to get into the Big Ten prediction segment. We're going to do this all the way throughout the week. We'll get through every single conference as we go, but we're going to start doing just a segment where I give you quick thoughts on every single team. So we'll go through all 18 teams in the Big Ten, which is just ridiculous amounts of teams, but we'll break down all of those teams very quickly, just get you quick thoughts on all of them. Before we get into all the predictions, we'll get to all of the records I have for every single team in the conference. I'll give you my offensive player of the year, I'll give you my defensive player of the year, transfer of the year, freshman of the year, my championship matchup, and then finally my champion. So we'll give you all of that. For all of the awards, I'll give you another guy to watch in that kind of race. So definitely will be a lot of content there, and you'll have plenty to get mad at me about. I'm sure about that. Then we'll get into the group of five. We'll talk about how it's shaping up going into 2024. We'll go through every conference pretty quickly and just give you guys an idea of who's to watch, who's, not necessarily has a super big shot to win that conference this year. Then we'll finish it off with some Monday questions. Fall camp is starting all around the country, and I want to get off some questions about the different fall camps around the country and the biggest questions I have around some of those out there. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and that's always good for the both of us. Again, if you want to use that is gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in and let's talk about this House settlement. I would start off right with the Big Ten picks, but want to give some people some time to trickle in. I know this is a very early morning, so don't necessarily want to jump into it too quickly and have people miss out. But the House settlement has obviously been a huge thing around college sports. It is going to be the thing that defines college sports in so many different ways going forward, and we just crossed another huge hurdle into getting this kind of in effect and knowing all the rules and everything kind of through the storm, let's put it that way. We've kind of gotten a little bit closer to that possibly being the case, and it's definitely something that we've been hoping for quite some time. We have been waiting for this, and everything has kind of been slowly trickling out. Well, we just got a huge thing, and one of the biggest ones that we were wondering about was the roster cap. What was that going to look like going forward? Because you don't necessarily want to give football just all autonomy to give 130 scholarships, because then it could hypothetically take away from other sports, or it could just get in the way of, this being an equitable experience in every athletic department. So overall, this was something that was likely going to happen. It is going to be 105 players, and there is going to be no scholarships within that, there's going to be no walk-ons within that, so the Baker Mayfields of the world, the Stetson Bennett's of the world, those will become less and less prevalent. Now, I will say about this, Baker Mayfield, Stetson Bennett, obviously a lot of aura was added to them because they were a walk-on, but at the end of the day, there will still be remarkable stories of guys coming up from very low on the depth chart to make a starting role and make some history at their team. So while, they won't have that walk-on moniker right next to them, it's still being a pretty incredible story and still plenty of those to come. But overall, we are losing walk-ons. We are getting a shrunken team when it comes to going from 130 to 105. Makes things a little bit harder. The evaluation process just got that much more important. You have to be able to make sure you're bringing in the right kids, and not only bringing in the right kids, but not bringing in too many. There's obviously been an approach for the last little bit that if there's a guy that is super talented, but he's had some troubles, really putting in the work and having that elite work ethic that you need at the college football level, you'll take a flyer on him and say maybe a change of scenery will be enough and he'll be able to continue moving forward and play some really good football for us. That might not be the case anymore because you don't have as many scholarships to give, you have more scholarships to give out technically, but there are some ways around it that people have been using for quite some time. But overall, there's going to be more conversations like that. The amount of guys you're bringing in from the portal, the amount of guys you're bringing in from recruiting, everything is going to change just a little bit because you got to account for that extra 25 players that you were losing. But this does help some other programs out there. Baseball makes the jump from, I believe, 11.7 scholarship players all the way up to 34. So there is definitely a huge jump here. Softball goes from 12 to 25. So where you take away from football just a little bit in terms of resources, you can funnel that to different avenues. And I think we all understand that football is going to be okay. I think we need to at least push a little bit more energy into making sure these smaller sports in the college world are upright and standing and in good shape going forward. And this is obviously another big time step. We've had so many questions when the House settlement was passed of how this is going to be implemented. And I think there's still a lot of those questions around how that revenue sharing, how that 22 million, 20 million, however you decide to distribute that, how that's going to be distributed among your athletic department. That's still a huge question. And frankly, I think this development makes it more inclined for some of the money to be pushed even more towards football and basketball and baseball and leave a little bit less for the smaller sports because you're getting a couple more scholarships. So it kind of is a double-edged sword for some of those smaller sports. You do get you do get more scholarships to play around with. It's about 5 to 10 million added every year for expenses for schools with these added scholarships. So definitely another bill that athletic departments are going to have to worry about, and another reason why this is going to be a very, very transformative time in our sport and in college sports overall, because there are so many different questions about how this is implemented, how people go about things, and all of these different things that are going to be really, really fascinating to watch. But going back to the roster cap, you have to play 17 games now to win a national title, or at least 16 to win a national title, and you're going to have to rotate guys in and out more often now than ever before. And we'll see it this year. We'll get a nice little case study of what that kind of looks like. How often are you rotating offensive linemen? How often are you rotating defensive linemen? How are you keeping these guys fresh down the stretch of the season where you want to play 17 because you want to be in that championship game at the end of the year? And yes, the NFL does have, 53 active roster players with 16 practice squad players, but they can also make moves during the season. In college football, you can't just go up and get someone from USF because you need a need at cornerback. So that's kind of the big difference here, and it adds a lot to the job of head coach, which is already an absolute nightmare. So those general managers, the recruiting directors, all of those people just became that much more important. The Courtney Morgans of the world over at Bama are super, super important people to have in your program, because they're going to be the ones kind of setting the pace of how many guys do you bring in, how many transfers versus high school kids do you bring in, how do you kind of allocate money within the team. There's going to be so many things that fall on the shoulders of those people, and it's going to be really interesting to see where we come out the other side. But the other huge domino that fell was on the NIL side of this, and it's a huge one, and it's definitely one that I don't necessarily love quite as much as the roster cap. The roster cap, I think, has plenty of really good consequences that will come of it, with whether it's, the group of five benefiting a little more by getting some of these players that would have gone to the big schools for the walk-on opportunities, whether it's, allocating a little bit more money to the smaller sports, whatever that looks like. There are definitely enough pros there for me to say, okay, roster cap, more than fine. The NIL ruling is going to cause some problems. There's no two ways about that. NIL agreements over $600 will be subject to review by clearinghouse to ensure that it is legitimate, fair market value agreements and not a pay-to-play structure. So essentially just not making sure that these, athletic departments, these football programs, what have you, are not just throwing money at a kid to get him to commit. It's more of this makes sense for who he is, for what he's going to do for this program, and there's a number of different gray areas within that could cause some problems, and I think we are going to see a number of lawsuits from this. That's really no other way to put it. There's going to be a number of players that feel like their case wasn't handled fairly, or the university feels like they have gone by the letter of the law but are being, railroaded by someone from the outside. There is going to be some back and forth here, and it's going to be really, really interesting to watch this one, because $600, there are a lot of NIL agreements that go above $600. I can promise you that. So it's going to apply to a lot of these different agreements, and it's going to be really interesting to see, how does this work? Do people get mad because you get denied $700 because it's not fair market value? Is it going to be a little bit more stringent when you get up into the crazy amounts of money in these NIL deals? Who's going to benefit the most? Who's going to get hurt the most? There's a million questions, and frankly, I think a lot of them are going to be figured out in court, but we'll figure that out as we kind of go down this path. And overall, I think one of the big things here is there is going to be some type of a roster or salary cap of sorts, right? With this revenue sharing, 22 million seems to be the moniker that you can go up to that number. If you go over it, then you got a problem on your hands. You absolutely cannot do that. So that kind of opens the door for collectives to stay right where they are, because the reality is, if you're a Georgia, if you're an Oklahoma or a Texas or a Bama, what have you, you're going to want to keep that competitive advantage. And if you know that Bama and Georgia, if you both know that you are putting out 22 million every single year regardless of the year, you're going to want to put in another 22 million or another 50, whatever the number is. You're going to want to put in a lot more money through collective to try to create that gap between you and your biggest rival, or you and the team that's coming up from the second tier of your conference into the top tier. That's the way you're able to kind of keep that gap between you and everyone else. So collectives aren't going anywhere, and that adds another whole weird layer to this that is going to add to all of the craziness around this. But overall, we did just take a huge step in figuring out what the future of the sport is going to be. You know, we learned what the roster cap is going to be. 105 players seems relatively fair to me. I know coaches are not too happy about that because it does make their job a little bit harder, but the reality is, I think for the health of college sports overall, and really college football and the lower levels of college football, I tend to think it's a good thing. The NIL one it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch that unfold over the next couple of years. And frankly, I'd be surprised if we didn't run into some issues. That's what I'll leave it at right there. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, it is time to start some of the predictions. We're going to first break down all of the teams in the Big Ten, just give you some quick hitters on all of the teams that you need to know about. And then in the third segment, we will get into all the predictions. But let's take our break, and we'll be right back with the Big Ten breakdown right after this.